A first-class ticket earned not by privilege but through years of relentless effort, countless sacrifices, and the quiet strength of a woman who had spent her life fighting to be taken seriously, was supposed to be a well-deserved triumph for Dr. Althea Williams, a brief chance to rest in comfort before stepping into one of the most important moments of her career. Yet for one flight attendant, the sight of a black woman seated in 2A was not a picture of success, but a mistake that demanded correction. And so began the venomous whisper, the sharp and public accusation, and finally the humiliating walk of shame to the back of the plane, where she was stripped of dignity with the casual cruelty of someone rearranging baggage. But the universe, with its strange sense of balance, rarely lets injustice stand for long, and just 7 minutes later, in that same first-class cabin where she had been told she did not belong, panic would spread, voices would rise, and a life would suddenly hang in the balance, leaving only one unshakable question. What happens when the very woman you cast aside is the only one who can save you? The Global Air First Class Lounge at JFK was an oasis of curated calm. The air was scented with something subtle and expensive, a blend of white tea and citrus. Low, melodious jazz hummed beneath the quiet clinking of porcelain and the soft murmur of conversations. For Dr. Althea Williams, this was more than just a perk. It was a necessity. She sank into a plush leather armchair, the deep navy blue a soothing contrast to the organized chaos of the main terminal she just navigated. For the past 72 hours, sleep had been a stranger. She had performed a marathon 14-hour cardiac bypass surgery on a high-profile diplomat, a procedure so delicate it had involved experimental techniques she herself had pioneered. Now she was on her way to Geneva to deliver the keynote address at the World Cardiology Summit, an honor that was the culmination of 2 decades of relentless dedication. Her speech, meticulously prepared, was set to challenge long-held assumptions in transplant medicine. Her ticket, seat 2A in first class, wasn't a luxury, it was a tool. She needed the flight to decompress, to sleep, to arrive in Switzerland sharp and ready. Althea was a woman who commanded respect without ever needing to raise her voice. At 42, she possessed a grace that was both innate and hard-won. Her charcoal gray pantsuit was impeccably tailored, her low bun was neat, and her only jewelry was a simple, elegant watch, a gift from the first patient whose life she'd saved as an intern. She sipped her chamomile tea, reviewing notes on her tablet, her focus absolute. The boarding call for flight GA714 to Geneva echoed softly through the lounge. Althea gathered her belongings, a sleek leather carry-on and a briefcase containing her life's work, and made her way to the priority boarding lane. She presented her ticket to the gate agent, who offered a warm, professional smile. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Williams. We hope you have a pleasant flight." Stepping onto the plane was like entering another world. The first-class cabin was a cocoon of muted tones, brushed metal, and soft lighting. She found her seat 2A, a spacious pod with its own privacy screen, lie-flat bed, and a small, chilled bottle of champagne waiting. She stowed her carry-on, slid her briefcase into the side pocket, and settled into the buttery leather seat, finally allowing a deep sigh of relief to escape her lips. She was on her way. It was then that she first saw Brenda Fisher. Brenda was the lead flight attendant for the first-class cabin, a woman whose entire being screamed of brittle, forced perfection. Her blonde hair was lacquered into a flawless chignon, not a single strand daring to stray. Her uniform was so crisply starched it looked like it could stand on its own, and her smile was a slash of bright red lipstick that didn't quite reach her cold, assessing eyes. She moved through the cabin with an air of ownership, her movements sharp and efficient. When her eyes landed on Althea, they paused for a fraction of a second too long. There was no smile of welcome, just a flicker of something unreadable, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. Brenda greeted the older white man in seat 1A, Mr. Robert Miller, with effusive warmth, offering him a pre-departure drink and addressing him by name. She did the same for the couple across the aisle. When she reached Althea, the warmth vanished. "Can I see your boarding pass?" The tone was flat, not a request but a demand. Althea, slightly taken aback, retrieved the pass from her jacket pocket and handed it over. Brenda examined it as if it were a complex legal document, her eyes scanning it from top to bottom. She looked from the name Dr. Althea Williams to Althea's face, then back to the pass. "You're in 2A, Brenda stated, as if Althea might be confused. "Yes, that's correct," Althea replied, her voice even. Brenda handed the pass back without another word, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't offer a drink. She didn't offer to take Althea's coat. She simply turned and continued her duties, leaving a chill in her wake. Althea felt a familiar, weary pang. She had faced this subtle brand of prejudice countless times, in medical school and boardrooms, even in the elite circles she now moved in. It was the quiet assumption that she didn't belong, that her presence in a space of privilege must be a mistake. She tried to brush it off. She was tired and she wouldn't let one sour attendant ruin a vital journey. She closed her eyes, focusing on the hum of the engines, willing herself to relax. The other first-class passengers settled in. The cabin door was sealed, and the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway. For a moment, Althea allowed herself to believe the unpleasantness was over. She couldn't have been more wrong. The plane had reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, and the seatbelt sign had just pinged off. The soft glow of the cabin lights created a tranquil atmosphere. Althea had just opened her briefcase to give her speech one final review when Brenda Fisher's sharp shadow fell over her again. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again," Brenda said. Her voice was louder this time, sharp enough to cut through the cabin's quiet hum. A few heads turned. Althea looked up, a frown creasing her brow. "Is there a problem?" "We appear to have a duplication in our seating manifest," Brenda lied, her expression a mask of feigned professional concern. "There's another passenger who's supposed to be in this seat. We just need to verify everything." The lie was clumsy and transparent. The cabin was barely half full, and the seat next to her, 2B, was empty. Althea knew instantly what this was about. It wasn't about a seating manifest. It was about her. But she maintained her composure, handing over her pass once more. Brenda took it and made a show of tapping on the tablet she carried. She swiped and frowned, her face a pantomime of manufactured confusion. This is very strange. It seems there was an error at the gate. My system is showing this seat is allocated to a different passenger, and your name is registered for a seat in the main cabin." Althea's heart began to beat a little faster, a hot surge of anger rising in her chest. She kept her voice steady, low and firm. "That's impossible. I booked this ticket 2 months ago. You can check my confirmation email, my frequent flyer status with your airline. I'm an executive platinum member. I assure you, this is my seat." "I understand, ma'am," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But the system is the system. Sometimes these things happen with last-minute upgrades or staff travel." The insinuation was clear. Althea must have gotten the seat through some fluke or handout, and it was now being reclaimed for its rightful, implied owner. At this point, Robert Miller in 1A, a kind-faced man in his late 60s, leaned over. "Excuse me," he said to Brenda, "but this is ridiculous. This lady was one of the first to board. I saw her. Leave her be." Brenda shot him a withering look, her plastic smile tightening. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is an official airline matter. Please allow me to handle it." She turned her focus back to Althea, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial yet threatening whisper. "Now we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. I can have you quietly moved to your correct seat, or I can call the captain and the air marshal to have you removed for refusing to comply with a crew member's instructions. It's your choice." The threat was audacious, a gross abuse of power. To be threatened with an air marshal, to be painted as a disruptive passenger, was a humiliation Althea had never imagined. She could see the other passengers staring now, some with sympathy, others with suspicion. Whispers started to ripple through the cabin. The scene Brenda was pretending to avoid, she was actively creating. Althea felt the weight of 1,000 similar moments, a lifetime of having to prove herself, of having to absorb indignities with a smile. She could fight. She could demand to see the captain, show her credentials, and raise hell. But it would cause a massive scene, brand her as the angry black woman, and utterly shatter the calm she so desperately needed. She would win the battle but lose the war for her own peace of mind before the most important speech of her life. With a heavy heart, she made a calculated decision. She would comply for now and deal with the fallout on the ground. The formal complaint she would file would be a thing of surgical precision. "Fine," Althea said, her voice betraying none of the fury raging within her. "There's no need for threats. Where is this other seat?" Brenda's face flooded with a smug, triumphant relief. She had won. "Excellent choice," she purred. "It's seat 34E, right this way." Althea stood up, her movements deliberate and graceful. She took her briefcase, leaving her carry-on in the overhead bin, as a silent promise that she would be back. As she prepared to follow Brenda, she met Robert Miller's gaze. He looked at her with an expression of profound apology and disgust at the flight attendant's behavior. He gave her a small, supportive nod. The walk from seat 2A to 34E was the longest walk of Althea's life. It was a walk of shame, past the curious and pitying eyes of the business-class passengers, through the curtain into the cramped, noisy world of economy. Every step was a fresh humiliation. Brenda led the way, her back ramrod straight, a general marching a prisoner of war. She stopped at a middle seat, squashed between a sleeping man whose shoulders spilled over the armrest and a teenager blasting music through their headphones. "Here you are," Brenda said, her voice bright and dismissive. "I'll have one of the other attendants bring you a complimentary drink for the inconvenience." Without another glance, Brenda turned and marched back to her pristine first-class domain, leaving Althea standing in the aisle, the injustice of it all washing over her in a cold, sickening wave. Seat 34E was a different universe. The luxurious space of first class was replaced by a claustrophobic reality of minimal legroom and the constant jostling of passengers and crew in the narrow aisle. The gentle hum of the premium cabin was swapped for a cacophony of coughing, a crying baby somewhere in the back, and the tinny hiss from the teenager's headphones beside her. Althea slid into the seat, her knees pressing uncomfortably against the seat back in front of her. The recline button was broken. Humiliation burned in her gut, a feeling so intense it was almost physical. She, Dr. Althea Williams, a woman who held lives in her hands, who was respected by peers across the globe, had been publicly shamed and displaced based on nothing more than the color of her skin. Brenda's lie about a seating duplication was so flimsy it was insulting. The true reason was written in every condescending smile, every dismissive gesture. Brenda had looked at her and seen someone who didn't belong. A junior flight attendant, a young woman with a kind face named Chloe, came by a few minutes later, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Ma'am, Brenda, Ms. Fisher, sent me back. She said to offer you a drink on the house." "I'm fine, thank you," Althea replied, her voice tight. The young attendant lingered. "I'm really sorry about what happened up there," she whispered, leaning in. "That wasn't right." Althea gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, that means a lot." Chloe nodded and hurried away, leaving Althea alone with her thoughts. She pulled out her tablet, determined to focus on her speech, but the words swam before her eyes. The injustice of it all kept replaying in her mind. She thought about the years of sacrifice, the missed holidays, the sleepless nights on call, the immense pressure of her job. That first-class seat wasn't a prize, it was a tool she had earned 100 times over. Meanwhile, back in the rarefied air of first class, Brenda Fisher was basking in the glow of her perceived authority. She had handled a situation, restored what she subconsciously saw as the natural order of things. She saw the empty seat, 2A, not as a symbol of her bigotry, but as a testament to her control. She moved through the cabin with renewed vigor, topping up champagne glasses, laughing at a passenger's joke, exuding an air of impeccable service. She paid special attention to the man in 3A, just behind Althea's now vacant seat. He was a distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed. He had been engrossed in some financial reports and hadn't seemed to notice the earlier commotion. Brenda knew who he was from the passenger manifest, Mr. Harrison Vance. As in the CEO of Global Air, her service became a performance for his benefit. She addressed him with reverent deference. "Mr. Vance, can I get you anything at all? Another sparkling water?" Perhaps our selection of aged cheeses? No, thank you, Brenda. I'm fine, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable weight of command. He gave her a polite but brief smile before returning to his work. Brenda felt a thrill. The CEO was on her flight, in her cabin. It was a perfect opportunity to shine, to demonstrate her unflappable competence. In her mind, her decisive action with Dr. Williams was a point in her favor. She had kept the cabin orderly and exclusive, exactly the kind of environment a man like Mr. Vance would appreciate. She felt a smug satisfaction settle over her. Her day, which had started with a stressful commute and a reprimand from her supervisor for a minor uniform infraction, was finally turning around. She was in control. Everything was perfect. As she cleared away a lunch tray, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, this is Captain Evans speaking. We're hitting a bit of unexpected turbulence over the North Atlantic. I'm going to turn the seatbelt sign on. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin and take your seats." The plane gave a sudden, jarring lurch. A few glasses clinked nervously. Brenda, the seasoned professional, moved quickly and calmly, ensuring everything was locked down. She buckled herself into her jump seat, her smug smile still faintly playing on her lips. Everything was under control. She had handled the situation, impressed the CEO, and the flight was proceeding as planned. The little bump of turbulence was nothing. The time on the cabin's digital clock read 3:15 p.m. EST. It had been exactly 7 minutes since Dr. Althea Williams had been forced into seat 34E. The turbulence was more violent than the captain had let on. The plane shuddered and dropped in a series of nauseating lurches. Nervous gasps rippled through the economy cabin. Althea, a frequent flyer, gripped her armrest but remained outwardly calm. Her mind, however, was a storm of its own. She was mentally composing the letter she would write to Global Air. It would be factual, precise, and devastating. She would detail Brenda Fisher's actions, her lies, and the profound professional and personal damage her discrimination had caused. Back in first class, the atmosphere was also tense. The rattling of the cabin was more pronounced, and even the most seasoned travelers looked uneasy. Brenda remained in her jump seat, her professional smile plastered on, though a hint of unease was now visible in her eyes. Suddenly, a loud, strangled gasp cut through the noise of the rattling plane. It came from seat 3A. Every head in the first-class cabin snapped in that direction. Mr. Harrison Vance, the CEO, was clutching his chest. His face, moments before a picture of calm authority, was now a terrifying mask of panic and pain. His skin had taken on a pale, grayish hue, and beads of sweat were popping up on his forehead. He can't breathe," said the woman across the aisle, her voice trembling. Brenda unbuckled herself immediately, her training kicking in. "Sir? Mr. Vance? Can you hear me?" she asked, rushing to his side. Vance's eyes were wide with terror. He clawed at his collar, his lips turning a faint shade of blue. He was making a horrifying wheezing sound, each breath a desperate, failing struggle. "What's happening?" Robert Miller asked from his seat, his voice sharp with alarm. "I don't know," Brenda snapped, her composure beginning to crack. "He's not responding." Another flight attendant, a young man named Mark, joined her. "Is he choking?" "No, look at his neck, his face. It's swelling," Brenda said, her voice rising in panic. This was beyond the scope of her standard first aid training. This wasn't a simple faint or a case of someone choking on a nut. This was something far more terrifying. "The medical kit! Get the medical kit!" Brenda ordered. Mark scrambled to retrieve it. Brenda fumbled to loosen Mr. Vance's tie and unbutton his collar, her hands shaking. The CEO's wheezing grew fainter, a sign that his airway was closing. His eyes began to roll back in his head. The turbulence continued to jolt the plane, adding a layer of chaos to the unfolding nightmare. Brenda felt a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. The CEO of her airline was dying, in her cabin, on her watch. Her career, her entire life, flashed before her eyes. The dream of a promotion, the praise she craved, it was all turning to ash. Mark returned with the red emergency medical bag and ripped it open. It was filled with bandages, antiseptics, a defibrillator, but they didn't know what to use. They were trained to stabilize, to follow instructions, not to diagnose a complex medical crisis at 35,000 feet. "We have to call the captain. Tell him to radio for medical advice," Brenda yelled. Mark was already on the intercom. Mayday, mayday! First class to cockpit. We have a medical emergency. Passenger unresponsive. Severe respiratory distress. The captain's voice, strained but steady, came back instantly. Roger that. We're getting a line to a ground-based medical team. What are the symptoms? As Brenda relayed the terrifying details, the swelling, the cyanosis, the wheezing, a horrifying thought struck her. They needed a doctor, a real doctor. And in that moment of sheer panic, her mind, as if playing a cruel joke, conjured the image of the woman she had just banished, the woman whose boarding pass had clearly read, Dr. Althea Williams. Brenda had seen the title but had dismissed it. In her prejudiced view, it was probably a PhD in something useless like art history, a title used to get undeserved perks. The thought that she might be a medical doctor had never crossed her mind, because the woman didn't fit her mental image of what a high-powered doctor looked like. The blood drained from Brenda's face. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. What if she was? What if she had just kicked the one person on this entire plane who could save Harrison Vance's life into a middle-seat economy? The irony was so staggering, so cosmically cruel, that for a second, Brenda Fisher felt like she was the one who couldn't breathe. Is there a doctor on board? The captain's voice boomed through the entire aircraft, overriding the cabin noise and the anxious whispers. It was the sentence no passenger ever wants to hear. In seat 34E, Althea's head snapped up. The words cut through her anger and humiliation, immediately replaced by the instinct that had been drilled into her for 2 decades. Her personal feelings evaporated. There was a patient. That was all that mattered. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, just as the junior flight attendant, Chloe, came rushing down the aisle, her face pale with panic. "We need a doctor. Is anyone a doctor?" she called out, her eyes scanning the rows of faces. Althea met her gaze. "I am," she said, her voice calm and clear, a beacon of authority in the rising tide of fear. "I'm a cardiac surgeon." Chloe's eyes widened in a mixture of shock and overwhelming relief. "Oh, thank God, please come with me. It's in first class." The phrase, "it's in first class," hung in the air between them for a second. The place she had been so unceremoniously ejected from was now the place that desperately needed her. A bitter smile might have touched another person's lips, but Althea felt nothing but the pull of her oath. She grabbed her briefcase. It contained not just her speech, but a small personal diagnostic kit with a high-end stethoscope and a pulse oximeter she never traveled without. "Lead the way," she said simply. Following Chloe up the aisle was a surreal experience. It was the reverse of the walk of shame she had taken just minutes earlier. Passengers who had watched her be exiled now stared at her with a new kind of awe and hope. They parted like the Red Sea to let her pass. As she stepped through the curtain back into the first-class cabin, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Mr. Vance was slumped in his seat, his skin a deathly gray. Brenda was fumbling with an oxygen mask, her face a mess of panic and sweat, her perfect makeup starting to run. Mark was trying to work the defibrillator, not sure if he should even use it. When Brenda looked up and saw Althea, her entire body went rigid. Her jaw dropped. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, horrified mask. It was a moment of pure, undiluted shock. The woman she had dismissed, humiliated, and cast out was now standing before her. Not as a problem to be solved, but as the only possible solution. Althea didn't spare Brenda a glance. Her focus was entirely on the patient. "Clear the way. Everyone step back," she commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it resonated with an absolute authority that silenced the cabin instantly. "What happened?" Mark, the younger attendant, answered immediately, relieved to have someone take charge. "He was fine 1 minute, then he just started gasping for air. He ate some of the complimentary nuts about 20 minutes ago. His face and neck are swelling." "Anaphylaxis," Althea diagnosed instantly, her mind racing. "Severe allergic reaction. His airway is closing. The defibrillator is useless. This isn't a primary cardiac event, it's respiratory failure. Where is the epinephrine in your medical kit?" Brenda just stared, frozen. Her mind was a short-circuiting mess of disbelief and terror. "Where is the epinephrine?" Althea repeated, her voice sharper this time. finally snapping Brenda out of her stupor. The, the kit, I don't, Brenda stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the red bag. Althea dropped to her knees, ripped the bag open, and her trained eyes found it in seconds. 2 EpiPen auto-injectors. Get him out of the seat and onto the floor. Now, we need him flat to prevent shock. Robert Miller and Mark immediately helped ease Mr. Vance's limp body into the spacious aisle. Althea tore the cap off the EpiPen, a familiar, practiced motion. I need to administer this into his outer thigh. Someone get his trousers and belt off, she ordered. There was a moment of hesitation. It was the CEO of the airline. Althea didn't wait. She took a pen from her pocket and, with a surgeon's precision, tore the seam of his expensive trousers, exposing his thigh. She pressed the EpiPen firmly against the muscle and held it for a count of 10. The device clicked, delivering the life-saving dose of adrenaline. One is in, she announced, her eyes fixed on Mr. Vance's face. Mark, I need you to monitor his pulse. Chloe, get the oxygen mask ready. And you, she said, finally looking directly at Brenda, her eyes like chips of ice. You are going to be my assistant. Open my briefcase. Get out the black case inside. Hand me my stethoscope. Brenda moved like a robot, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the latches on Althea's briefcase. She handed over the stethoscope, her eyes wide with a dawning, soul-crushing horror. She hadn't just mistreated a passenger. She had almost let the CEO of her company die, right after pushing away the one person on a transatlantic flight who had the skill to save him. The karma was so swift, so precise, it was breathtaking. The first-class cabin, once a symbol of luxury and calm, had transformed into an airborne intensive care unit. At its center was Dr. Althea Williams, a figure of absolute command. The epinephrine began its work, a chemical warrior battling the massive histamine reaction raging through Mr. Vance's body. There were small, hopeful signs. The terrifying wheezing sound from his throat lessened slightly, and the bluish tinge on his lips began to recede. But they weren't out of the woods. Anaphylaxis could have a biphasic reaction, a second, equally severe wave of symptoms that could occur hours later. He's not stable yet, Althea announced, pressing her stethoscope to Mr. Vance's chest, her brow furrowed in concentration as she listened to his heart and lungs. His heart rate is tachycardic, and his blood pressure is dangerously low. We need to get an IV started to administer fluids and steroids if you have them. Mark looked at the medical kit helplessly. We have saline bags and an IV kit, but we're only trained to use them under direct instruction from a ground medic. Well, you're under direct instruction from me, Althea stated, leaving no room for argument. The captain needs to know we have to divert. Find the nearest major airport with a level 1 trauma center. We need to land now. Chloe was already on the intercom, relaying the message to the cockpit with a newfound reverence for the woman who had taken control of the crisis. Althea turned her attention back to Brenda. The flight attendant was standing by, pale and useless, wringing her hands. I need you, Althea said, her voice sharp and direct. Stop panicking and focus. I need you to hold his head, tilt his chin up slightly to keep his airway open. Can you do that? Numbly, Brenda knelt, her perfectly manicured hands now trembling, gently cradling the head of her company's CEO. She was forced into a position of intimate servitude to the woman she had deemed unworthy of her cabin. Her world turned completely upside down. Looking at Althea, her focused eyes, her steady hands, her calm, authoritative voice, Brenda saw not just a passenger, but a titan. The sheer scale of her misjudgment was crushing her. Althea worked with methodical grace. With Mark's help, she prepped the IV. Finding a vein on a patient in shock is notoriously difficult, but Althea found one on the first try, inserting the catheter with a surgeon's practiced ease. As the saline solution began to flow, Mr. Vance's vitals began to stabilize further. Robert Miller watched from his seat, utterly mesmerized. He had seen Brenda's petty act of bigotry and was now witnessing an act of supreme professionalism and grace. He discreetly took out his phone and began recording, not the medical procedure itself, but the dynamic of the scene. Althea in charge, Brenda kneeling in terrified submission. He knew this story needed to be told. Minutes, which felt like hours, ticked by. Mr. Vance's breathing became deeper and more regular. His eyes fluttered open. confused and hazy. He tried to speak, but Althea placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Vance, my name is Dr. Althea Williams. You've had a severe allergic reaction. You're on a plane, but we're going to land soon. You are safe. Just try to rest." His eyes met hers, and in them, she saw a flicker of recognition and profound gratitude. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew this woman was the reason he was still breathing. The captain came over the intercom again, his voice urgent. "To the doctor in first class, we are diverting to St. John's International Airport in Newfoundland. We have an ambulance and medical team on standby. ETA is 47 minutes. 47 minutes, Althea repeated to herself. We just have to keep him stable for 47 more minutes. She used the second EpiPen as a precautionary measure and continued to monitor him relentlessly. Throughout this entire ordeal, Althea was a machine of pure competence. She never once looked at Brenda with an "I told you so" glare. She didn't make a single sarcastic comment. Her focus was absolute. Her professionalism was its own form of rebuke, a statement more powerful than any angry words could ever be. She showed Brenda, and everyone else in that cabin, exactly who she was, not through argument, but through action. For Brenda, those 47 minutes were an eternity in hell. Forced to assist, she was a direct witness to the brilliance of the woman she had scorned. Every calm command from Althea was a nail in the coffin of her career. Every stabilized vital sign of Mr. Vance was a testament to her own catastrophic failure of judgment. She had not only been cruel, she had been stupid. She had put prejudice before passenger safety, and the passenger in question was the one man who held her entire future in his hands. Karma wasn't just knocking on her door. It had kicked the door off its hinges and was sitting in her living room. The heavy thud of the Boeing 777's landing gear on the tarmac at St. John's was more than just the sound of a plane landing. For the passengers of Flight GA714, it was the sound of a nightmare ending. For Brenda Fisher, it was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. As the plane decelerated, the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting ambulance grew brighter, painting the interior of the cabin in frantic, alternating strokes of crimson and sapphire. The lights seemed to pulse in time with the terrified pounding in Brenda's chest. She stood frozen near her jump seat, a ghost in a perfectly starched uniform. The woman who, less than an hour ago, had been the imperious queen of this small kingdom, was now an invisible, irrelevant fixture. All eyes, all energy, all hope were fixed on Dr. Althea Williams, who was still kneeling by Mr. Vance's side, her hand on his wrist, monitoring his pulse with the calm focus of a seasoned professional. Before the engines had even fully spooled down, Captain Evans gave the order for the ground crew to connect the jet bridge. The moment the cabin door hissed open, a team of 3 paramedics, their faces etched with urgency, boarded the plane. They moved with a practiced, efficient speed that made the flight crew's earlier panic seem amateurish. The lead paramedic, a burly man with a kind but no-nonsense face named David, made his way directly to the scene. His eyes swept over the IV bag hanging from an overhead compartment, the discarded EpiPens, the prone form of Mr. Vance, and settled on Althea. "I'm assuming you're the doctor," he said, his voice a respectful baritone. "Dr. Althea Williams," she confirmed, rising to her feet. "Cardiac surgeon. The patient is Harrison Vance, 62. He presented with acute respiratory distress approximately 50 minutes ago, consistent with a severe anaphylactic reaction to an unknown allergen. Likely nuts he consumed shortly beforehand. He was cyanotic with significant facial and laryngeal edema. I administered 2 0.3 milliliter doses of epinephrine intramuscularly and started him on a saline IV to combat hypotensive shock. His vitals have stabilized, but he'll need steroids and observation for a potential biphasic reaction." David's eyebrows shot up in impressed respect. He and his team exchanged a look. A cardiac surgeon, in flight of fee during turbulence. They knew with absolute certainty that this woman had single-handedly prevented a death. "You saved his life, Doc," David stated plainly, the professional compliment carrying immense weight. "No question about it. Okay, guys, let's get him packaged." As the team worked to transfer Mr. Vance to a portable stretcher, a flicker of consciousness returned to him. His eyes, no longer clouded with the haze of hypoxia, were sharp and intelligent. They found Althea. He tried to lift a hand, and she instinctively took it. "Dr. Williams?" he rasped, his voice weak but clear. "I heard them. You. Thank you. I owe you my life." "It was my duty and my privilege, Mr. Vance," she replied, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're in good hands now. Just focus on getting better." His gaze then moved past Althea, sweeping across the cabin until it landed, with the force of a physical impact, on Brenda Fisher. Brenda flinched as if he had struck her. The polite, professional mask of the CEO was gone, replaced by a look of glacial fury. His eyes, cold and assessing, took in her disheveled state, her tear-streaked makeup, her trembling form. He didn't speak to her. He didn't need to. That single silent look was a complete and total condemnation. It stripped her of her uniform, her title, her career. In that moment, she was no longer a lead flight attendant. She was just the woman who had almost killed him through her bigotry. Vance then turned his steely gaze to Captain Evans, who had emerged from the cockpit to oversee the situation. "Captain," Vance said, his voice gaining strength with every word, "I want a full, detailed, and unvarnished report of this incident on my desk by morning. I want to know everything that happened in this cabin from the moment we closed the doors in New York. And I mean everything," he repeated, adding a final devastating directive, "including the original seating arrangements and any subsequent changes." With that, he gave a curt nod and allowed the paramedics to wheel him off the plane, leaving a crater of silence in his wake. His last words hung in the air, a death sentence for Brenda's career. The cabin remained tense as the remaining first-class passengers were told they would be deplaning temporarily. As Althea gathered her briefcase, Robert Miller approached her, his face a mixture of awe and paternal concern. "Dr. Williams, that was the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I just want you to know I saw what she did to you earlier. The way she spoke to you, the threats. It was unconscionable. I have it on video. If you need a witness for anything that comes next, you have my card, my number, my word. I will testify on your behalf in any court or boardroom you need me to." "Thank you, Mr. Miller," Althea said, deeply touched by his solidarity. "That means more than you know." Captain Evans then approached them, his expression grim. "Dr. Williams, Mr. Miller, would you be so kind as to join me in the cockpit for a moment? I need to take your official statements." He then turned to the other crew members. "Chloe, Mark, see to the passengers. As for you," he said, his voice dropping several degrees as he addressed Brenda, "Ms. Fisher, do not move from that spot. Do not speak to anyone. Is that understood?" Brenda could only manage a pathetic, jerky nod, her entire world having shrunk to the few square feet of galley floor she was standing on. The cockpit was a stark, professional space, a world away from the passenger cabin. Surrounded by the myriad dials, screens, and controls, Captain Evans was no longer just a pilot. He was the ultimate authority on this vessel. He listened intently as Althea, with the precision of a surgeon dictating a post-op report, recounted the events. She was factual and devoid of emotion, detailing Brenda's initial coldness, the false claim of a seating duplication, the public demand for her to move, and the threat of involving an air marshal. Then Robert Miller gave his account, his voice vibrating with the moral outrage Althea had suppressed. He described the overt condescension, the smug satisfaction on Brenda's face, and the collective discomfort of the other passengers. Finally, he played the video on his phone. The small screen showed Brenda leaning over Althea's seat, her body language aggressive, her voice dripping with false courtesy. Captain Evans watched the video, his jaw tightening until the muscle bulged. He had heard the accounts, but seeing the visual evidence of his lead flight attendant harassing a paying first-class passenger was damning. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, malicious abuse of power. An abuse that, had events unfolded just slightly differently, would have led to a fatality on his flight. "Thank you both," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You have been more than helpful. Dr. Williams, we owe you a debt we can never repay." When Althea and Robert returned to the cabin, the process of Brenda's excommunication had already begun. The other flight attendants, Chloe and Mark, were busying themselves, pointedly avoiding her gaze. She was an outcast, a pariah. The social and professional isolation was immediate and absolute. Captain Evans emerged from the cockpit a minute later and walked directly to Brenda. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The cold, professional finality of his words was far more brutal. "Ms. Fisher," he began, "pursuant to airline regulations and my authority as captain, you are hereby suspended and relieved of all duties, effective immediately. You will gather your personal belongings from the crew locker. You will then be escorted from the aircraft by airport security. You will surrender your airline ID. You are not to contact any member of this crew. A representative from Corporate Human Resources will be in touch with you within 24 hours to arrange a formal disciplinary hearing, which I assure you will be a mere formality. Your career with Global Air is over." Each word was a hammer blow. Brenda swayed on her feet, her face ashen. The public nature of her downfall was complete. She had sought to publicly shame Althea and was now being subjected to a far greater and far more deserved humiliation. A uniformed security officer was already waiting at the jet bridge. Without a word, Brenda turned and walked the final, agonizing walk of shame off the plane she had once commanded. Her career and reputation left in tatters on the galley floor. 2 days later, Althea was in her hotel room in Geneva, basking in the afterglow of a successful keynote address. Her speech had been a triumph, her research lauded by the international community. The incident on the plane felt like a surreal dream. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a restricted number. "Dr. Williams, this is Harrison Vance." The voice was still a little weak, but the underlying power was unmistakable. He wasn't alone. On the conference call were Global Air's Chief Legal Officer and the Executive Vice President of Public Relations. The entire corporate machine had been mobilized. Vance began with a profound and sincere apology. "Doctor," he said, "words cannot express how sorry I am for what you endured on my airline. It was a failure on every level, and I take full personal responsibility. What you were subjected to was abhorrent, and it is a stain on our company that we are determined to remove." The EVP of PR then outlined their plan. They would be issuing a public statement praising her heroic actions and unequivocally condemning the discriminatory behavior of the former employee. They offered to make a $1 million donation in her name to the World Health Organization's Cardiovascular Research Fund. Finally, the chief legal officer spoke. "Dr. Williams, beyond our apologies and the donation, we would like to extend to you our highest honor. You are being granted lifetime President's Circle status. This is an invitation-only tier above all other loyalty programs. For the rest of your life, you and a companion will fly free, in first class, on any Global Air flight, to any destination in the world. It is the very least we can do to express our immeasurable gratitude." Althea was silent for a moment, processing the sheer scale of their response. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," she said finally. "I accept your apology, but I have one condition for putting this matter to rest." "Anything," Vance said instantly. "I want Global Air to implement a new mandatory training program for all cabin crews, developed by diversity, equity, and inclusion experts, focusing on unconscious bias and de-escalation. I want what happened to me to be the catalyst for ensuring it never happens to anyone else." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by Vance's voice, filled with genuine admiration. "Consider it done, Doctor. It will be called the Williams Initiative." Brenda Fisher's disciplinary hearing was, as the captain predicted, a formality. She was terminated for cause. The video, the witness statements from Robert Miller and other passengers who had come forward, and the damning report from Captain Evans formed an insurmountable mountain of evidence. The note in her file blacklisted her. When she tried to apply to other major carriers, she found the doors were silently but firmly closed. The airline industry is a small world, and the story of the flight attendant who had almost killed the CEO after kicking his savior off the flight had become a cautionary legend. Within a year, she was forced to sell her condo. The glamorous life of international travel was replaced by a mundane job in retail, sorting clothes in a stockroom. Every time she saw a plane fly overhead, it was a bitter reminder of the life she had thrown away. Not because of a single mistake, but because of a deep-seated ugliness in her own character that had finally been exposed to the world. Her punishment wasn't just the loss of a job, It was the loss of her identity, brought about by a karmic justice that was as swift as it was absolute. In the end, Brenda Fisher wasn't fired just for her prejudice. She was fired because her prejudice made her incompetent. She failed at her most fundamental duty to ensure the safety and well-being of her passengers. She looked at Dr. Althea Williams and, instead of seeing a person, a passenger, or even a potential resource, she saw a problem to be removed. And that single biased judgment almost cost her CEO his life and ultimately cost her everything she had. This story is a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person is their character, not the uniform they wear or the assumptions they hold. Dr. Williams' grace under pressure, her unwavering professionalism in the face of disrespect, is a testament to her strength. If this story of swift and fitting karma resonates with you, and if you believe that dignity and respect should always triumph over prejudice, then please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories where justice is served. Tell us in the comments, what did you think of Brenda's ultimate karma?